There is a bizarre, deeply delusional phenomenon that occurs when you cross paths with a high school bully years after the fact. Somehow, in the twisted, self-serving labyrinth of their minds, the passage of time acts as a universal eraser. They forget the venom they spat, the deliberate shoulders they dropped into your chest in the hallway, the way they made your adolescence a suffocating nightmare. Instead, they look at you and see an old war buddy, a shared survivor of the trenches of puberty. They approach with a sickeningly familiar grin, completely oblivious to the fact that you haven't forgotten a single agonizing second of what they did. The audacity is genuinely breathtaking. It's as if they believe their cruelty was just a quirky phase, a minor character flaw easily glossed over by the fact that you once shared a geography classroom. But memory is a stubborn thing, and sometimes, the universe hands you a perfectly wrapped opportunity to remind them that relevance is a privilege, not a right. The suffocating scent of stale frankincense and floor wax still haunts the periphery of my memories whenever I think about St. Jude's Academy. It was a bleak, brick-faced Catholic secondary school that specialized in two things: draconian uniform policies and churning out spectacular hypocrites. It was an environment designed to crush anything that didn't fit neatly into its archaic binary mold. And right in the crosshairs of that dogmatic misery was my best friend, Lorcan. Lorcan was a brilliant, chaotic spark of creativity in a sea of gray wool skirts and navy blazers. During our fourth year, he finally found the courage to step into his truth, cutting his hair short, adopting his new name, and openly navigating his transition. It was an act of profound bravery, considering the corridors we walked. He was already dealing with a tempest of personal struggles at home, carrying weights I could only guess at, yet he remained the most fiercely loyal friend I had ever known. But St. Jude's was unforgiving. Because everyone had known him before his transition, a certain faction of the student body took it upon themselves to be the self-appointed enforcers of the school's unspoken bigotry. At the absolute vanguard of this cruelty was Callum. Callum was one of those boys who peaked at 15, armed with a sharp jawline, an aggressively average intellect, and a desperate need to tear others down to elevate himself. He never directed much venom my way. I was invisible enough to escape his radar, but he made Lorcan his personal target practice. It wasn't just casual ignorance, it was a dedicated athletic level of transphobia. Callum would loudly and deliberately use Lorcan's dead name in the echoing locker rooms. He would hip-check him into the metal frames of the doorways, sneering slurs under his breath just low enough that the passing nuns wouldn't hear. He turned every shared class into a minefield, ensuring Lorcan's mere existence was treated like a punchline. I spent years watching my friend bite the inside of his cheek to keep from crying, years fantasizing about throwing my heavy, hardback biology textbook directly at Callum's perfectly gelled head. But high school eventually mercifully bleeds out. We survived. Lorcan graduated, escaped the suffocating grip of St. Jude's, and flourished. He was accepted into a prestigious university for the arts, his talent finally given the oxygen it needed to catch fire. He found his people, grew a patchy but endearing beard, and became the vibrant, unapologetic person he was always meant to be. I couldn't have been prouder of him. As for Callum, he evaporated into the ether of the past, becoming nothing more than a bad memory, a cautionary tale about the banality of adolescent evil. Fast forward a little over a year ago. It was a bleak, relentlessly drizzly Saturday afternoon in our hometown. My parents, my younger sister Imogen, and I were running a gauntlet of incredibly mundane errands. We were tired, our shoes were damp, and morale was dangerously low. Naturally, we sought refuge in the great British equalizer, Greg's. Stepping through the glass doors, the heavy, comforting aroma of baked grease, seasoned pork, and warm puff pastry enveloped us. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, reflecting off the damp linoleum floor. The queue was moderately long, a shuffling line of rain-soaked locals staring vacantly at the brightly lit display cases of sausage rolls and steak bakes. Imogen was glued to her phone. My parents were locked in a quiet, intense debate over whether to get a box of jam donuts, and I was simply scanning the menu boards, completely disarmed. We shuffled forward, finally reaching the counter. I stepped up to the till, shaking the rain from my jacket, and looked up to place my order. The air in my lungs turned instantly to ice. Standing on the other side of the counter, clad in a violently blue and orange uniform polo and a deeply unflattering hairnet, was Callum. For a fraction of a second, the bustling noise of the bakery faded into static. Time dilated. I stared at his face, older now, the sharp jawline slightly softened by what looked like a diet consisting entirely of the unsold stock he was currently peddling. His eyes flicked from the till up to me, settling into that vacant retail stare, before a spark of recognition ignited in his pupils. I watched the gears grind in his head, I watched him recognize me, and then I watched the most baffling transformation occur. The sneer I remembered from the St. Jude's hallways was nowhere to be found. Instead, his face broke out into a wide, impossibly chummy grin, as if I were a long-lost cousin who had just returned from a decade at sea. "Rhiannon, oh wow hey. You all right?" he practically chirped, leaning over the counter with a sickeningly familiar swagger. In that microscopic sliver of time, a dozen different reactions queued up in my mind. I could scowl. I could ignore him and just coldly order my food. I could lean over the glass and loudly remind him that he was a bigoted, miserable coward who made my best friend's life a living hell. The anger was there, hot and metallic in the back of my throat. But as I looked at him, at his pathetic, eager grin, at the way he assumed he was entitled to my warmth, my recognition, my shared nostalgia, a different, much colder instinct took over. I realized that yelling at him would mean acknowledging him. It would mean admitting he had taken up space in my mind all these years. It would give him significance. I didn't want to give him significance. I wanted to erase him entirely. I let my facial muscles completely relax. I blanked my eyes, draining them of any warmth, animosity, or familiarity. I tilted my head slightly to the left, adopting the polite, mildly strained expression one reserves for a stranger asking for directions in a foreign language. "Sorry," I said, my voice smooth, even, and utterly devoid of recognition. "Do I know you?" Callum's grin faltered, slipping a fraction of an inch. A nervous, breathy chuckle escaped his lips as he shifted his weight. "It's me, Callum, from St. Jude's. We were in the same year." My parents and Imogen had stepped up beside me now. I could feel my sister's elbow brushing my ribs. They knew exactly who Callum was. I had vented about him relentlessly for years. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Imogen's thumb freeze over her phone screen. She knew my memory was flawless. She instantly knew what I was doing. I narrowed my eyes slightly, performing a masterful pantomime of a person genuinely struggling to search their mental archives. I stared directly into his panicked, flickering eyes and let the silence stretch. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, the ambient hum of the refrigeration unit seemed deafening. "Callum," I repeated the name slowly, tasting the syllables as if they were entirely foreign. "St. Jude's?" "Yeah," he said, his voice pitching up an octave in desperation. He gestured vaguely to his own face. "Callum. We had Mr. Harrison for geography. I used to sit 2 rows behind you." I let out a soft, polite sigh, offering him a small, apologetic smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm really sorry, I have absolutely no idea who you are." The absolute devastation that washed over his features was a masterpiece worthy of hanging in the Louvre. The blood rushed to his cheeks, staining them a blotchy, mottled crimson. His mouth opened and closed like a landed trout. The illusion of his relevance had just been shattered with a sledgehammer, and the pieces were raining down around him. He wasn't the menacing bully anymore. He wasn't the cool guy from high school. He was just a stranger in a hairnet being completely stonewalled by a girl who looked at him like he was a slightly confusing smudge on a window pane. To my right, my dad suddenly coughed into his fist, turning his back to the counter, his shoulders shaking with the effort of holding in a bark of laughter. Imogen had essentially folded herself in half, biting her lower lip so hard it was turning white, staring intently at a display of vegan sausage rolls to avoid making eye contact with anyone. "Oh," Callum stammered, his hands fluttering nervously over the touchscreen of the till. The swagger was entirely gone, replaced by the frantic, shrinking energy of a cornered animal. "Right, my mistake, you just look exactly like someone else." "Happens all the time," I lied smoothly, my tone brisk and professional. "Can I just get a triple chocolate muffin and a steak bake, please?" "Yeah. Yeah, of course," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper now. He couldn't meet my eyes. He grabbed a pair of tongs, his hands actually trembling as he clumsily wrestled a muffin into a paper bag. He moved with the sluggish, defeated posture of a man walking to the gallows. He punched the order into the machine, the beep sounding unnaturally loud in the tense air. "That'll be £4.20, he muttered to the counter. I tapped my card against the reader. It beeped approvingly. He handed me the paper bag. His eyes flicked up for one last, desperate attempt to find a crack in my facade, a hint of a smirk, anything to prove I was messing with him. I gave him nothing, just the blank, polite nod of a satisfied customer. As I turned on my heel to leave, the absolute last thing I heard him whisper to himself, a pathetic, breathy surrender to the sheer, crushing awkwardness of the moment, was, "Ah. Oof, awkward, haha." We walked out of the bakery in absolute silence. We crossed the pavement, the rain still spitting down, and got into the car. My dad shut his door, gripped the steering wheel, and exhaled a long, shaky breath. "Was that," my dad started, turning his head to look at me in the rearview mirror. "The guy who made Lorcan's life a misery for 3 years?" I finished, unwrapping my muffin. "Yes, yes, it was," the car erupted. Imogen let out a shriek of laughter, slapping her hands against the back of my seat. My dad threw his head back, roaring with laughter, while my mum wiped a tear from her eye, shaking her head in awe. "That was the coldest, most ruthless thing I have ever witnessed in my entire life," Imogen gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "You broke his brain, you literally factory reset him." "He deserved a lot worse," I said, taking a bite of the intensely sweet chocolate. "But honestly, I don't think anything could have hurt his ego more than being completely forgotten." We drove home with the heater blasting, the atmosphere in the car lighter than it had been all day. I texted Lorcan later that evening, recounting the entire interaction. He called me immediately, howling with laughter so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear, telling me it was the best gift I could have ever given him. Revenge is often depicted as a fiery, explosive thing. We are taught that getting even requires shouting matches, grand confrontations, and the dramatic airing of grievances. But sometimes, the most devastating weapon you can wield against someone who thrived on making you feel small is your own indifference. Bullies operate under the delusion that they matter. They think the pain they caused cemented their place in your history, giving them a permanent lease in your head. Taking that away from them, looking them dead in the eye and showing them a blank slate, strips them of all their power. It reduces them from a towering antagonist to a completely irrelevant extra in the movie of your life. It is the quietest, most surgically precise way to humiliate a person. If someone treated you like garbage, they do not get to dictate the terms of your reunion. They do not get your anger, and they certainly do not get your friendship. They get nothing. If you've ever had to deal with someone who thought they could casually re-enter your life after making it a nightmare, let me know how you handled it in the comments below. Did you confront them, or did you give them the cold shoulder? Hit that subscribe button if you believe the best revenge is living well and occasionally gaslighting a bully into thinking they don't exist. See you in the next one.